Like and subscribe to Sinister Shadows Studio, Babysitting in the Dark. The house was silent as I sat on the couch, my eyes fixed on the glowing screen of my phone. I was supposed to be babysitting little Emily while her parents enjoyed a rare night out. But as the hours dragged on, boredom began to gnaw at me. Emily had already gone to bed, leaving me alone in the dimly lit living room. I glanced up at the clock on the wall. It was getting late, and the house felt eerily quiet. I shook off the feeling of uneasy and tried to focus on scrolling through social media, but then the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. My heart skipped a beat as I fumbled for my phone, using its feeble light to navigate my way to the hallway, where the circuit breaker was located. I hesitated for a moment before flipping the switch, hoping desperately that the lights would come back on. But nothing happened. The darkness remained, thick and suffocating. Panic began to rise in my chest as I realized I was alone in a strange house with no power. I called out for Emily, my voice shaky with fear, but there was no response. I took a deep breath and forced myself to calm down. I had to find a flashlight or some candles. With trembling hands, I made my way to the kitchen, feeling my way along the walls in the pitch-black darkness. As I rummaged through the drawers, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. Relief flooded through me as I pulled out a flashlight and switched it on, casting a small beam of light into the darkness. But just as quickly as the relief came, it vanished. In the dim glow of the flashlight, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye, a shadowy figure darting across the room. My heart leaped into my throat as I spun around, the beam of light trembling in my hand. There was nothing there. Just the empty kitchen, bathed in darkness. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the feeling of unease lingered. I made my way back to the living room, shining the flashlight around the room as I went. Emily's toys lay scattered on the floor, their once familiar shapes now looming in the darkness like sinister creatures waiting to pounce. I called out for Emily again, louder this time, but still, there was no response. My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. What if something had happened to her in the darkness? What if there was someone else in the house with us, lurking in the shadows? I forced myself to push aside the fear and focus on finding Emily. With shaky hands, I made my way upstairs, the creaking of the old wooden steps echoing through the silent house. Each step felt like an eternity as I climbed higher and higher, the darkness pressing in around me like a suffocating blanket. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a faint glimmer of light coming from under Emily's bedroom door. Relief flooded through me as I hurried towards it, the beam of the flashlight trembling in my hand. But as I reached for the doorknob, I heard a sound that froze me in place, a soft, whispering voice, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. It sounded like Emily, but there was something wrong, something off about it. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. But then, driven by a desperate need to find out what was happening, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was bathed in an eerie glow, the light emanating from a single candle on Emily's bedside table. She sat in the center of the room, her back to me, her voice still whispering in that strange, unnatural tone. "Emily?" I called out, my voice trembling with fear. She turned to face me, and in the flickering light of the candle, I saw her face, pale and drawn, her eyes empty and lifeless. And then I saw what she was whispering, over and over again, in a voice that chilled me to the bone. "Come play with us, forever and ever." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized the truth. Emily was no longer herself. Something had taken hold of her in the darkness, something dark and malevolent that lurked in the shadows of the house. I turned and ran, the sound of Emily's voice echoing in my ears as I fled down the stairs and out into the night. And as I drove away from that house of horrors, I knew that I would never be able to forget the terror of that night. The night I went babysitting in the dark, and everything went horribly wrong. Shadows in the silence. The house seemed different when I stepped inside. Maybe it was the way the shadows loomed in the corners, or perhaps it was the eerie silence that enveloped every inch of the place. Whatever it was, it made my skin crawl. My parents had left for a week-long trip, leaving me alone in our old, creaky house. At first, I was excited about the prospect of having the place to myself, but now, as the night descended, I couldn't shake off this feeling of dread. I tried to distract myself by watching TV, but every sound seemed magnified in the quiet house. The ticking of the clock echoed in my ears, and the wind outside howled like a chorus of lost souls. I turned off the TV and decided to head to bed early, hoping sleep would offer me some solace. As I lay in bed, the darkness of the room felt suffocating. I pulled the covers tight around me, trying to block out the creeping sense of unease. That's when I heard it, a faint scratching noise coming from somewhere in the house. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to listen. Was it just my imagination playing tricks on me? I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, that maybe a tree branch was scraping against the window. But the scratching persisted, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Summoning all my courage, I crept out of bed and tiptoed through the silent house, my heart pounding in my chest. The scratching seemed to be coming from the basement. With trembling hands, I reached for the door handle and slowly descended into the darkness below. The basement was cold and musty, illuminated only by the dim glow of a single light bulb swinging from the ceiling. I scanned the room, searching for the source of the scratching. And then I saw it, a shadowy figure huddled in the corner, its back turned to me. My breath caught in my throat as I took a step closer, my heart hammering in my chest. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. The figure didn't respond, but the scratching grew louder, more frantic. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that the figure wasn't alone. There were others, dozens of them, lurking in the darkness, their eyes gleaming with malevolence. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling with fear. How had they gotten into the house? What did they want with me? I turned to run, but it was too late. They were upon me, their cold hands reaching out to drag me into the darkness. I screamed, my voice echoing through the empty house as I fought against them with all my strength. But it was no use. Their grip was too strong, their touch too cold. And then everything went black. When I woke up, it was morning, the sun shining weakly through the curtains, birds chirping outside. For a moment, I thought it had all been a horrible nightmare. But then I saw the scratches on the basement door, the faint traces of darkness lingering in the corners of the room. I stumbled out of the house, my heart still racing with fear. I had to get out of there, away from that place, and whatever lurked within its walls. And as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving behind more than just an empty house, that I was leaving behind a part of myself, forever lost to the shadows, the darkness within. It was a typical evening, and I was looking forward to some peaceful alone time. My parents were away for the weekend, leaving me with the entire house to myself. I decided to take advantage of the solitude by practicing some yoga in the living room. The soft glow of the setting sun streamed through the windows as I rolled out my yoga mat and began to stretch. The gentle rhythm of my breathing filled the room as I moved through the familiar poses, letting go of the stresses of the day. But just as I settled into a soothing flow, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. At first, I wasn't too concerned. Power outages were common in our neighborhood, and the lights usually came back on within a few minutes. But as the darkness lingered, a sense of unease began to creep over me. I paused in my yoga practice, my senses on high alert. The silence of the house felt oppressive, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. I reached for my phone, hoping to use its flashlight to navigate my way to the circuit breaker. But when I tried to turn it on, I realized with a sinking feeling that the battery was dead. Panic began to rise in my chest as I fumbled in the darkness, searching for something, anything, to light my way. That's when I heard it, the soft sound of footsteps moving towards me from the shadows. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to listen, my pulse pounding in my ears. Was someone else in the house with me? I called out, my voice trembling with fear, but there was no response. The footsteps grew closer, their rhythm slow and deliberate. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that whatever was approaching was not human. With trembling hands, I reached for the matches on the coffee table and struck one, illuminating the room in a flickering orange glow. What I saw made my blood run cold, Standing in the darkness was a figure, its form twisted and contorted in unnatural ways. Its eyes gleamed with a malevolent light as it advanced towards me, its movements jerky and erratic. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling with terror. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare, a trick of the darkness playing tricks on my mind. But the figure drew closer, its presence filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape the horror that lurked in the shadows of my own home. With a cry of desperation, I turned and ran, my bare feet pounding against the hardwood floor as I fled towards the front door. But as I reached for the handle, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut with a resounding thud, trapping me inside. I pounded on the wood, screaming for help, but no one came. I was alone, trapped in the darkness with whatever nightmare awaited me. I turned to face my pursuer, my heart pounding in my chest as I braced myself for the inevitable. But as the figure drew closer, something strange happened. Its form began to shift and warp, twisting into a grotesque parody of a human face. And then, with a sickening lurch, it lunged towards me, its shadowy tendrils reaching out to engulf me in darkness. I screamed as I felt them wrap around me, pulling me into the abyss. And then everything went black. When I woke up, it was morning, the sun shining weakly through the curtains, birds chirping outside. For a moment, I thought it had all been a horrible nightmare. But then I saw the matches lying on the floor, their last ember flickering out in the dim light. I stumbled to my feet, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Had it all been real, or just a trick of my imagination? I didn't know, and I didn't want to find out. With a shudder, I stumbled out of the house, vowing never to return. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark and malevolent still lingered within those walls, waiting to claim its next victim.